Hello, Tony, your deck architect here, back on my channel once more with another deck profile. So, Grand Creators has been officially out for over a week now, and already the meta has become flooded with a slew of decks utilizing the Brave engine. But while that archetype is receiving all the hype right now, I feel like the other two archetypes from this set have received no mention whatsoever. Which is a darn shame, because I think both of these archetypes are highly underrated and very powerful. Thus, before Battle of Chaos releases in 2 weeks, our next two deck profiles will be dedicated to exploring these two archetypes. First up, we have the Ladies of the Church. Representing the most tasteful parts of anime's nuns with guns, today we're going to be talking about the Exosister. So to try to provide a sensible explanation to what this archetype is, the Exosister, derived from the words exorcist and sister, are based on the very popular media genre that mixes the magic girl trope with the holy warrior trope. You see this rather commonly in Japanese media, with popular examples including Bayonetta, the Gray Man's Lanali Lee, and Fire Force's Iris. The core concept of this genre is a group of girls tasked to fight unholy evil by invoking some supernatural power to transform and enhance their current wear, whether it be Bayonetta invoking Madama Butterfly's hair, Lanali Lee's Innocence boots, or Iris's Fire Force outfit. Exosister takes that idea to a near perfect implementation, by having all its members capable of transforming into stronger counterparts in response to unholy threats. These unholy threats, defined by Konami as graveyard manipulation, allows the deck to literally evolve against your opponent's plays into an Xyz-focused strategy designed to ruin graveyards and disrupt plays. On top of that, the deck also manages to fit in a sub-focus on sisterhood camaraderie, as their monsters work in pairs to provide you extra benefits here and there. All of this culminates to a deck that has got the workings of a great tempo plan on your opponent's turn and a fast aggro plan on yours. And that's what we're hoping to showcase as we get through the deck profile. Anyway, I've droned on long enough. Without a further ado, let's get into the deck profile. So diverting from the usual deck profile structure, the Exorcist deck profile will have me first introduce the entirety of the Exorcist lineup before introducing the non-archetype cards. The reason for this is because of the unique gimmicks that the deck plays under, which heavily influence the rest of our tech choices. Starting with our Exorcist monsters, true to their namesake, the Exorcist monsters come in sisterly pairs. Each Exorcist main deck monster mentions another monster in its name, with their effects providing additional benefits if you resolve them while controlling their counterparts. For our first pair, we have 3 Exorcist Stella and 3 Exorcist Ellis. Stella, during the main phase, can special summon one Exorcister from your hand, while Ellis can special summon herself from your hand if you control another Exorcist monster. Then, if you resolved either effect while you controlled the other, both Stella and Ellis grant you an additional 800 life points. In the grand scheme of the whole deck, Stella and Ellis are your main play builders. Both pack the extension effects needed to put more Exorcisters onto the field to allow you to naturally make your Xyz monsters. This is very crucial as, given the very low attack power of your Exorcisters, this is your only means of reliably accessing any form of damage in this deck. Now, because Stella can special summon Ellis, while Alice could already special summon herself, sometimes you want to save one for a different play such that you aren't wasting extenders needlessly. However, the 800 life points granted is a very useful bonus, especially in the context of the spells and traps we play. So it's not entirely the worst loss to extend with one into the other, as even that sets us up for other plays. Moving on from there, we have the second pair of Exosisters in our 3 Exosister Sophia and 1 Exosister Iris. Sophia, while you control another Exosister, allows you to draw 1 card. Iris, on the other hand, does not require an Exosister on the field, instead requiring one in hand to bottom to the deck to draw 1 instead. And, like our prior pair, if you resolve either effect while in the presence of the other, you gain 800 life points. Compared to Stella and Ellis, Sophia and Iris are definitely the worser duo. Possessing no extension effects to speak of, Sophia and Iris will have to rely on other extenders to really get the ball rolling. Individually, Sophia is not the worst, as combining it with a Stella or Ellis allows you to get a free +1. Iris, on the other hand, is just subpar. In very few scenarios do you want to trade an Exosister for a random draw, and half the time the only Exosister you want to bottom is the Iris itself, which you cannot do. But we have to at least play one of Iris, as her pairing with Sophia enables a lot of unique plays with our spells and traps. Fortunately, regardless of whether you can make extendable plays with any of these sisters, the deck still has mechanics to make use out of any Exosister you open. See, in addition to their unique effects, the Exosister main deck monsters also possess a shared trigger effect. At any point that your opponent would move a card out of either graveyard, your present Exosister can Xyz summon an Exosister Xyz monster using just themselves as material. Now, the wording on this trigger is super vague, and I ended up having to comb through a ton of database rulings to fully understand what it means. But to simplify the rulings, as long as your opponent is the one choosing to move a card out of either graveyard for any purpose, your Exosisters can trigger. With that explanation in mind, it's not hard to conclude how absolutely easy it is to trigger this effect. In this modern age, almost every deck utilizes some form of interaction with the graveyard. Whether it be reviving monsters or banishing cards or shuffling cards back from the graveyard, almost every modern deck will at some point move a card out of their graveyard. And this just allows our deck to skip a few steps to directly go into our Xyz as a one-carded speed. Speaking of these Xyz, the Xyz monsters for this deck are the transformed counterparts of our four sisters. For Stella, we have 2 Exosister Caspatel. For Ellis, we have 3 Exosister Michaelis. For Sophia, we have 2 Exosister Asophiel, and for Irene, we have 1 Exosister Jabreen. All 4 of these Xyz pack protection effects against monsters special summoned from the graveyard. Caspatel and Michaelis cannot be destroyed by battle by a monster special summoned from the graveyard, while Asophiel and Jabreen cannot be destroyed by the activated card effects of a monster special summoned from the graveyard. More importantly, each Xyz sister gains a unique effect on the turn they are Xyz summoned using an Exosister as material. Caspatel prevents monsters from being special summoned from the graveyard that turn. Michaelis can quick banish a card from the opponent's field or graveyard. Asophiel prevents cards from activating their effects in the graveyard, and Jabreen can quick negate the effects of a monster your opponent controls. These effects were designed to give your Exosister Xyz some interaction on your opponent's turn when you warp them in through your Exosister trigger effects. And honestly, they're pretty strong effects. Michaelis and Jabreen are just generic disruption effects that most decks wish they had, while Asophiel and Caspatel effectively ruin graveyard interaction for that entire turn. Against decks like Drytron or Phantomites, the latter could end the turn, while against decks like Tri-Brigade and Swordsoul, the former could be enough to stop their plays. And even if they aren't flashed in on your opponent's turn, as long as you make an Exosister Xyz using an Exosister monster, you gain access to their effects for the turn, which can be equally useful on your turn to remove cards or lock up certain effects. But that's not all. Each of the Exosister also possess simple detach effects as well. By detaching a material, Caspatel can search for any Exorcist monster. Michaelis can search for any Exorcist spell or trap. Asophiel can bounce an opponent's monster, and Jabreen can grant an additional 800 attack to all Xyz you have and will control this turn. It's each of these 4 effects that really determine which one of them you want to go into on your turn. Caspatel and Michaelis are free advantage, with Caspatel being able to grab another sister for follow-up, and Michaelis being able to grab a back row for your opponent's turn. Asophiel is more offensive, as her removal clears up monsters to go in for damage, while Jabreen is the most offensive, and you'll commonly be saving her effect for turns where you can rush in with a bunch of Xyz for game. This decision, however, is made much easier by the fact that all 4 sisters are also generic Xyz monsters, only requiring 2 level 4s to make. This means that even if you don't open access to enough sisters to naturally make them, you could supplement that with natural level 4 extenders to just go into them for plays as well. This is super relevant in the context of Caspatel or Michaelis, as this essentially allows you to go into your Exosister plays without the need to initially open Exosisters explicitly, meaning that any 2 level 4s can potentially lead to a setup of Exosister cards ready to go on your opponent's turn. With the Exosister monsters now covered, we then move on to our spells, starting with our 3 Exosister packs. all your Exosister spells and traps, save one, require you to pay 800 life points to activate. Packs, when activated during the main phase, allow you to search for an Exosister card. Then, if you search an Exosister monster, you can special summon that searched monster if you have her counterpart either on the field or in the graveyard. Now, even without the second part to Pax's effect, Pax is a fantastic card for the deck, essentially being a searcher for any card in your deck. This is extra beneficial given Pax's ability to be searched by your Exosister Michaelis, which means that Michaelis can double for a second Casapatel in dire needs. However, unlike most search spells, Pax is made even better by the second part of its effect, which utilizes the pairing mechanic of our Exosister main deck monsters for more flexible extension as the game goes on. So long as we find a way to put a copy of each individual Exosister into the graveyard, we can use Pax to special summon out their counterpart directly from the deck. This has benefits not only for making your Xyz on your turn, but also on your opponent's turn as well. For you see, Pax is a quick play. This means that, by setting up your graveyard correctly, you can flash in your Exosisters on your opponent's turn to warp them into your Xyz when they least expect it. You can activate Pax in direct response to an opponent's play that would move a card out of the graveyard to guarantee that there is an Exosister on the field to see that happen, to guarantee an Exosister Xyz warp on their turn. This is probably the much safer way to utilize your Exosister effects, as most of your Exosister main deck monsters lack the stats necessary to survive on your opponent's turn. Thus, through Pax, you can always assure that the only time they'll be out on your opponent's turn is to see their trigger be met, to then directly go into your Exosister Xyz to go on the offensive. Moving on to our next spell, we have 3 Exosister Armament. Armament, like Pax, is a quick play spell that has you pay 800 life to target an Exosister monster and Xyz summon a different Exosister Xyz from your X deck using it as material. However, you may only use this effect on your opponent's turn unless your opponent controls a monster summoned from the graveyard. Exosister Armament acts as an alternative means of warping into your Exosister Xyz on your opponent's turn. By targeting any Exosister, you could turn it into a different Exosister Xyz of your choice. Since you made this new Xyz using an Exosister, that new Xyz also gains access to her additional effect as well to interact with your opponent during that turn. Since this effect targets any Exosister monster, you can also utilize existing Exosister Xyz monsters as well for this effect, which grants you a level of toolboxing in turning your current Exosister Xyz into a different Xyz required in future turns. Thanks to its quick effect nature, you can use Armament to dodge targeting effects, and, if somehow your opponent does commit a monster from the graveyard, you can also use Armament to flash into a new Xyz during the battle phase for additional damage as well, making Armament an incredibly flexible option searchable with your Michaelis for disruption or protection. Finally, our last Exosister spell consists of a lone copy of Exosister Carpe Diem. Carpe Diem, based on the Latin phrase Carpe Diem, or seize the day, is a continuous spell with 3 powerful effects. The first protects all your Exosisters from being targeted by effects from monsters special summoned from the graveyard. The second targets and destroys spells and traps whenever your Exosister monsters battle. But, most importantly, the third effect allows you to declare a card name whenever you would Xyz summon an Exosister monster to negate any activated and field effects of that declared card for the rest of the turn. Due to not having effect to directly advance any of your plays, Carpe Diem isn't intended to be your primary search target, often being the last choice search target for Michaelis when you've already opened the prior 2 spells. But, despite this, that doesn't discount how powerful each of Carpe Diem's effects are. The first effect is just a nice bonus, supplementing your Xyz Exosister's own protections with targeting protection on top. The second effect grants deck back row removal to outpexy traps and floodgates that would otherwise prevent you from playing. But that last effect is where it's really at. Functionally the same as a crossout designator, Carpe Diem helps you insulate your larger combos from a variety of disruptions. Simply summon out an Exosister Xyz through any of your various means and declare whatever you think could be a threat to never have to worry about it henceforth for the turn. Thanks to its trigger effect nature, it can also activate on your opponent's turn as well in response to when your Exosisters warp into their Xyz forms. This lets you repurpose this effect to act as actual disruption by naming a playmaker in your opponent's deck instead to prevent its use this turn. Additionally, owing to that trigger effect nature, it can also be used to chain block your Caspitael or Asophiel on summon effects, which not only guarantees that they lock out the graveyard, but a card on the field as well for a pretty hefty block on your opponent's entire game plan. Finally, wrapping up the Exosister cards with our lone trap, we have one Exosister Vadis. Vadis is a normal trap that, like Pax and Armament, can be activated by paying 800 life points. In doing this, you could summon out 2 Exosisters from your deck who mention each other in their text, but they are shuffled back into the deck during the end phase. Being a trap instead of a spell, Vadis isn't exactly what you can call a one-card Xyz maker. And because Exosister monsters get shuffled back on the end phase that they're summoned by Vadis, you also can't use Vadis for end phase setup either. No, the real use of Vadis is to act as another means of flashing in your Exosister monsters at the right moment. Much like how Pax can be utilized, you can chain Vadis to an opponent's graveyard manipulation to summon out one of your 2 pairings of Exosister monsters. In doing this, they will be on the field to see the graveyard manipulation occur to then trigger their effects to warp into 2 Xyz for a serious power play on your opponent's turn. At worst, you could save this card for your turn to tutor out 2 Exosister monsters from your deck, preferably a Sophia who can then draw you into a 3rd card for a decent +2 play. And that is primarily the reason we are playing the one Irene, as we can only summon Sophia through it mentioning Irene, and we can only summon Irene through it mentioning Sophia. Going into the non-archetypal monsters, we start with our 3 Dinotherium. As mentioned earlier, the Exosister Xyz monsters are generic Xyz monsters. As such, we can play level 4 extenders to help us access them much easier. Dinotherium is one such extender. While in the hand, Dinotherium can special summon himself to the field. This effect has no conditions to it, being by far the easiest extender you can utilize. However, if you do special summon Dinotherium this way, your opponent can target and revive any level 4 or lower monster from either graveyard. Now, to most decks, the goal of playing Dinotherium is to be an early game extender that you can costlessly use when neither player has a graveyard. However, in the Exosister deck, it's actually a way to potentially trigger our Exosister warp effects. Recall that the Exosister trigger whenever your opponent will move a card out of the graveyard. While in most cases this will be done solely by your opponent's cards, that trigger is not limited to just your opponent's cards. See, as long as an effect is granting your opponent the option of moving cards out of the graveyard, this will trigger your Exosisters. And it just so happens that Dinotherium's wording on its drawback meets that bill. With that understanding in mind, here's how extending with Dinotherium will play out. By first controlling at least one Exosister monster, you can summon out Dinotherium to put 2 level 4s on the field. In doing this, your opponent is stuck with a choice. If they choose not to revive a monster off of Dinotherium's effect, you can proceed onward as usual with overlaying your 2 level 4s to make your Exosister plays. But if your opponent is foolish enough to actually revive something, this will trigger your Exosister to go into a 1-card Xyz instead. If you choose to go into a Caspitael, you can then use Caspitael's effect to search for Ellis, to special summon Ellis to then overlay with the Dinotherium for a 2nd Exosister Xyz for twice as much advantage. This puts your opponent in a lose-lose situation where they really can't afford to take the benefits of Dinotherium, which only turns Dinotherium into one of the freest extenders available for the deck. From there, we then have one of each of the familiar possessed extenders consisting of 1 Inari Fire, 1 Gigabyte, 1 Archfiend Eater Nefariousness, and 1 Rasen Ryu. Since all your Exosisters are spellcasters, these 4 serve as 4 more random extenders for the deck, helping you meet the 2 level 4 quota needed to naturally go into your Xyz monsters. Now, because you can only special summon each of these extenders once per turn, you really don't want to play more than 1 of each lest you break on them. Fortunately, because each one only requires a spellcaster to special summon itself, they can all extend off of the same Exosister to produce larger plays when you open any combination of them. Wrapping up our extenders, we have 3 Parallel Exceed. So you may have noticed that each of our Exosister main deck monsters come in at under 1000 attack points. This means we can link any of our normal summon Exosisters into an Almirage to trigger Parallel Exceed into a free rank 4. This can be really useful when we open nothing else except for a single Exosister. But even if we were to open more than that, by putting any of our Xyz monsters in the extra monster zone, we can convert that Xyz into a gravity control to trigger Parallel Exceed that way as well. This allows us to potentially chain Xyz into Xyz for a number of cool advantage setups that we will explore in our combo components. Finally, wrapping up the main deck with the hand traps, we have the usual 3 Ash Blossom for Search Negation, 3 Effect Veiler for Effect Negation, 3 Infinite Impermanence for more flexible effect negation, but we also have a 3 of a new hand trap of sorts in our 3 Lord of the Heavenly Prisons. To explain our choice in playing Lord, you have to understand that all our back row, save one, is either a quick play or a trap card, and most of these cards are ones you want to trigger at specific times. Lord in turn helps this in 2 ways. First, by revealing itself, Lord protects your back row from destruction, which prevents your opponent from forcing them out early with cards like Lightning Storm or MST. But when you eventually get around to activating said back row, Lord can then special summon himself to not only put a big body onto the field, but also set you up on your next turn by setting a spell or trap directly from your deck. This affords you a great follow-up come your turn. For example, Exosister Vadis is a card that can be somewhat slow to be a playmaker on your turn given its trap nature. Through Lord, however, you can directly set Vadis from your deck without the need to set that up on your prior turn. This completely mitigates the drawback of Vadis being a trap while still allowing your deck to perform Disruption. Only now, through Lord, the Disruption will seamlessly flow into a great follow-up to clean the game up on the coming turn. Finally, wrapping up the deck profile with the remainder of our extra deck, we have the aforementioned Salamangreat Almirage and Gravity Controller for our Parallel Exceed plays. We have the 1 Zeus for when our big C's inevitably battle, but we then have also a mini Utopic Future Draco package consisting of 1 Gagaga Magician, 1 Utopic Future, and 1 Utopic Future Draco. If you haven't already deduced, the deck has an incredible Xyz capability of putting multiple Xyz on the field, very similar to how a Utopic Draco Future deck functions. As such, it's not hard for our deck to put up the 2 Xyz monsters necessary to go into Utopic Future and then Utopic Future Draco. And thanks to our Exosister Warp effects, it's equally very easy to amass Xyz onto the field, which we can convert into Draco after burning out their effects. And given how fast and easy we can burn through our Xyz, we can also utilize Gagaga Magician to revive them for Draco access that way as well. Now it's at this point that we once again reach the combo component of our deck profile. Now, Exosisters aren't exactly the craziest of combo decks, but the deck can do a fair bit of setup with a variety of different hands. Thus, to exemplify that, I will be doing 2 test hands today. I'm going to draw my hand to 5 and try to build the best board possible with it. And, since the Exosisters play on the opponent's turn, I will also be showcasing how the deck will play for an entire turn cycle after that as well. And with that, I believe the deck is shuffled, the field is ready, so let us begin. Starting with our first test hand, the hand that we're going to be working with first is going to include 1 Exosister Sophia, 1 Parallel Exceed, 1 Exosister Pax, 1 Lord of the Heavenly Prison, and 1 Exosister Armament. Okay, so this is what I consider a really good hand. Not only do we have full Xyz options with both the Pax and the Sophia, but we have a follow-up with Parallel Exceed as well. We have the Armament for our opponents from our Disruption, but we also have the Lord of Heavenly Prisons to protect the Armament as well as set up a follow-up. So let's see what we can do with this hand. I'm going to start by normal summoning out the Sophia before then activating the Pax to search my deck for an Exosister Irene. Where are you, Irene? Oh, at the beginning. Cool. In doing this though, since I control the Sophia on the field listed on the Irene, I can then special summon the Irene from my hand with Pax's effect. Then, since I control another Exorcist monster, I can activate Sophia's effect now to draw another card. From there, I'm then going to overlay the Sophia and the Irene to then make my Exosister, Michaela, of which I'll then use Michaela's effect, detaching a material from it, to search for an Exorcist spell, of which I'll grab a Pax. From there, I'm then going to link away the Michaela to summon out a gravity controller, and in doing so, I can then trigger the effect of my Parallel Exceed in my hand to special summon to a zone that gravity controller points to. In doing so, Parallel Exceed will then special summon out a second Parallel Exceed directly from my deck, of which both become level 4. Then I'm going to overlay both of these level 4 Parallel Exceed to summon out my Gagaga Magician, of which I can then detach a material from that Gagaga Magician to bring back the Michaela from my graveyard. I'll then overlay the Michaela and the Gagaga Magician to summon out my Utopic Future, of which I'll then slap on the Utopic Future Draco. Lastly, I'm then going to set the packs, I'm going to set the armament, and then reveal my Lord of the Heavenly Prison to protect them until its size is revealed. And then I'll pass turn to my opponent. Going into my opponent's turn, we have a few options. Obviously, we have the Utopic Future Draco for negation, but we have a few things we could do with the packs and armament set. Obviously, we can save the packs and activate it for when our opponent attempts to manipulate the graveyard. In doing this, when we activate the packs, we can then add from our deck to the hand another Exosister Sophia. And with Exosister Sophia in her hand and the Irene in the graveyard, I can then special summon the Exosister Sophia onto the field, and when it sees graveyard disruption, I can then Xyz summon using its own effect into a Michaela, of which Michaela's effect can then activate as a quick effect to banish a card on the field. From there, I can then also proceed to activate the armament, targeting my Michaela and then converting it into a Caspatel. In doing this, I can go Chainlink 1 Caspatel, and since the card was activated, Chainlink 2 Lord of the Heavenly Prison to special summon itself to the field, with Lord then setting from my deck to the field my Exosister Vadis, and then Caspatel resolving, chain blocked by the Lord, preventing my opponent from being able to special summon from the graveyard, for a total of 3 disruptions. Finally, going back to our turn, drawing for turn, we can then finish the game up. We're going to start by activating the effect of our Caspatel, detaching a material from it to search for an Exosister monster, of which let's say we can add our last Sophia. But before we even normal summon that Sophia, what we can do is we can then activate the effect of our Exosister Vadis to special summon 2 Exosisters from our deck, of which will summon out an Ellis and a Stella, since they both list each other in their names. We can then overlay both of these monsters to then summon out an Exosister Jabreen, of which we now are granted a quick effect negation for the turn. We'll then activate Jabreen's effect, detaching a material from it to increase the attack of all our Xyz monsters here and henceforth by 800, turning our Caspatel to a 3100, Jabreen to a 2200, our own Utopic Future Draco to 3800, and then combined with that, we still have the Lord at 3000 for a total attack bonus at this point of over 8000 damage. What's more is that even if somehow at this point our opponent would not be dead, we still have a follow-up play in the Dynetherium and Sophia for a draw, as well as a Veiler for the following turn. Going into our second test hand, the hand that we're going to be working with this time is going to consist of 1 Exosister Stella, 1 Infinite Impermanence, 1 Exosister Sophia, 1 Ash Blossom, and 1 Dynetherium. Okay, compared to our last hand, this hand is a little less stellar, but I think we can still work with it. The fact that we've opened Stella alongside another Exosister means that we have at least a play, and the Dynetherium opens up to a lot of unique options. So I'm going to start off by normal summoning out the Stella and then activating her effect to special summon out the Sophia. Then, since I control an Exosister in my Stella, I can activate Sophia's effect to draw another card, of which I drew a Gigabyte. And the Gigabyte actually makes things a lot better. We're going to special summon out the Gigabyte since we control a Spellcaster, and then we're going to overlay the Stella alongside the Gigabyte to summon out an Exosister Caspatel. From there, I'll activate Caspatel's effect, detaching the Stella, to then search my deck for an Exosister monster, of which I'll add an Exosister Ellis. Now from here I could always just special summon the Ellis and go off from there, but instead we're actually going to special summon out the Dynetherium. In doing this, I give my opponent a choice. My opponent can choose to revive the Stella currently lying in my graveyard, and in doing so, he will trigger I Sophia. So let's explore that option. Let's say my opponent does take the option of reviving the Stella to their field. In doing this, my Sophia will now trigger, allowing me to Xyz summon using her for 1 Xyz monster, of which I'll summon out an Exosister Michaelis. From there, I'll activate Michaelis' effect, detaching material from it to then search for an Exosister Spell and Trap, of which I'll then grab an Exosister Armament. But we're not done there. We'll then special summon out the Ellis since I control an Exosister monster, and then overlay with the Dynetherium, of which I'll then make an Exosister Asophiel. I'll then use Asophiel's effect, detaching the Ellis to the graveyard to then target the Stella on my opponent's field and then bounce it to my hand now. Then, because I control both 2 Xyz monsters, I'll then overlay both of them to then summon out my Utopic Future to then make a Utopic Future Draco, before then setting the Armament and then setting the Imperm before passing turn to my opponent. Going into my opponent's turn, we have about the same level of disruption as we had in the first board. Obviously, we do have the Utopic Future Draco for a negate and a steal, but we also have the Armament as well, of which we can use to target our Caspatel and then convert it into another Michaelis, of which Michaelis will then get the effect to banish a card our opponent controls. From there, we also have the Imperm on the negation, as well as an Ash Blossom prevent searching for a total of 4 disruptions. And then we can provide game in the following turn. How are we doing this? Well, supposing that the Utopic Future has removed 1 monster and the Michaelis Banish has removed a 2nd monster, if we were to open any other extender for our Stella, we have our play going. We're going to draw for turn, which is a Sophia, which is nice, but funny enough, even if we didn't open that card, Michaelis can grab us packs to search into another Exosister. But in this case, we won't be needing it. We're going to normal summon the Stella, activate her effect, summon the Sophia. We're going to activate Sophia, draw another card, the 3rd Sophia, great, before then overlaying both of these to summon out our Exosister, Jabreen. And you know where this is going to go. We're going to activate Jabreen's effect, Detachment Material, to give every one of my monsters 800 additional attack. Jabreen goes to 22, Michaelis goes to 33, and our Utopic Future goes to 38, which is well over lethal damage. And that's going to do it for our Exosister deck profile. So, what are my final opinions? Well, I gotta say I'm rather surprised actually. When I initially started building this deck, I imagined I would have to do a lot more to get the deck going. But with so many free extenders at its disposal and some of the most functional Xyz I have ever seen, the deck is actually very efficient at making boards and playing against the opponent. In all honesty, the deck feels like a much better version of the Utopic Future Draco deck profile I did a while back. While that deck can only summon out Utopic Future Dracos, this deck can do that just as well, but with the added benefit of being able to search disruption and follow-ups through Michaelis and Caspatel as well. And even without access to Utopic Future Draco, the deck is perfectly capable of doing its own thing to get by. Sadly, because not all decks heavily rely on the graveyard, this deck is still somewhat format reliant, which means that in some formats it can be better, but in some formats it can be worse. But given our current format of DPEs and Phantom Knights, I imagine right now is the right moment for Exosister to shine. Regardless, this has been Tony, your deck architect, with an Exosister deck profile. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you guys next time.